disease. So we will talk today about stress and the brain and nutraceuticals that can help to support brain function and adaptation. This was lecture yesterday by Andrew Robbins, but I'm using his materials and adding my own narration. So the stress is one of things that affect us as a society. I'm not sure if stress as high now as it was 200 years ago. It seems like we are in such a fast lane that there is always so much stress because of that, and we want to achieve this, achieve that, and that definitely adds to stress and depression. And frequently, both of those conditions, anxiety, depression, can be actually a result of inflammation that happens in the brain. And stress is defined as somatic reaction to environmental event, an adverse situation, mental frustration, or anxiety. And there is a Sally, if I pronounce it right, maybe not, he did have a theory of how stress affects our bodies. And he has proposed how people go through different adaptation responses. So you can see that if you cannot stop stressing out, you can end up with fatigue, malaise, risk of inflammatory conditions, risk of autoimmune conditions. And if you have hyperactive reactions, you can end up with anxiety, agitation, restless sleep, increased cholesterol, blood pressure, fatigue, impaired memory, different neurological issues, definitely gastrointestinal disorders. So you can appreciate that stress is one of the biggest root causes of chronic conditions, and depending which way you are reacting, you could have different set of conditions. At this point, it appears to be that we are living longer, but not necessarily better. And number of patients with Alzheimer, dementia, and other dementia is going up. So the cognitive function declines gradually. It actually starts 20 to 30 years before people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And you can go through stages of mild cognitive impairment where people have forgetfulness, some memory lapses, less attentive, problems with sleeping, noticing the finding words in communication. You probably have seen today our actor who, and here I am going with word finding problems, and his former wife, Demi Moore, announced that Bruce Willis actually does have dementia. And it was about a year ago when it was found that he had trouble remembering words and finding words to communicate. And now he was actually diagnosed with one version of dementia. It's not Alzheimer's disease, but still it is a neurodegenerative process that can happen. So mild cognitive impairment can occur first, or does occur first, then it leads to senile dementia, when people have increasingly forgetfulness, poor judgment, and memory losses become more frequent. And that leads to difficulty communicating, problems writing, reading, and organizing thoughts. And eventually people get to stage of Alzheimer's disease. And that may be associated with unawareness of surroundings, loss of speech, inability to dress themselves or take care of themselves, perform simple tasks like eating, and so on. So that's a process, and many parts of the conditions will overlap. So you've heard me talking about leaky brain or leaky gut syndrome multiple times, but there is a similar condition is leaky brain. And what it is there is a part of the brain lining that's supposed to be very tight and connected with tight junctions. And you can see here, it's listed as those yellow and purple dots, and they shouldn't allow certain chemicals to pass through from blood into the brain. However, if those tight junctions are no longer tight, that will allow those passages of those chemicals. And because of that, that can start affecting your brain. Apparently, having high levels of cortisol have been associated with mood disorders, as well as shrinkage of hippocampus. Parts of our adaptation to stress is change in our cortisol levels. Very first stage will be elevation of cortisol, then cortisol potentially will stay there for some time, then it will start dropping into more normal levels, but it's not necessarily part of good adaptation, and eventually it drops to a point that people may have total exhaustion. And some of them will develop through adrenal insufficiency. So other factors that affect our brains will be genetics. For example, people who carry gene ApoE genotype, certain version of that called E4, when especially people have the double copy, that may be associated with higher chance of Alzheimer. And it's interesting, it's more late onset of Alzheimer rather than early onset. And Alzheimer disease, patients with late onset of Alzheimer disease, probably 70 to 80% of them will have this gene. However, only a relatively small portion of carriers of this gene will actually go on and develop Alzheimer's. So it's not a sentence that if you were to have this gene, but it's definitely something to think about and start doing earlier rather than later. Other risk factors for dementia will be traumatic brain injury. And there are some modifiable risk factors that, according to this research published in Lancet, may prevent or delay up to 40%. And if you take care of that, it could be prevented. Cardiovascular risk, physical activity, healthy heart, healthy diet, social and cognitive engagement. And you probably know that during COVID, it was quite horrible for elderly people who were stuck inside of nursing homes without much of communication. They were sitting there in their room, isolated, and that's frequently led to worsening of their memory and development of full dementia. The genetic component, of course, is important, and there are probably several different layers of genetic component. It's not only about ApoE gene, so there could be other genes that are responsible. From functional medicine perspective, we want to address different pathways that lead to Alzheimer's disease. And of course, diet and inflammatory markers are very important and starter points. Apparently, in this study published 2017, people with celiac disease or non-gluten celiac sensitivity, and we're not talking about everybody else. We're talking specifically to patients who have celiac disease or who have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Apparently, if you are not on gluten-free diet and continue eating gluten, there is much higher chances of developing dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, or even vascular dementia or frontotemporal dementia as well. So other publication is Alzheimer type 3 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is usually people with insulin dependency. Frequently, it's younger children or adults who have low level of insulin. Type 2 diabetes, when we have insulin resistance, and possibility of Alzheimer being type 3 diabetes is when you have insulin resistance at the level of brain, and normal amount of insulin is not capable of pushing that sugar to the brain cells, and there is kind of almost starvation of brain cells because of that. there is interesting research with keto and memory. Ketosis in general works in such way that if you eat traditional diet, you have higher carbs and your sugar will rise after you eat a lot of carbs. And pancreas will secrete that insulin, and insulin will shuttles the glucose into cells. I usually kind of explain it that it's insulin is a key to a locks, and it opens the doors, and here's your glucose is able to go into cells and feed it, and that provides the energy. With ketogenic diet, or over time, let's say, over time, that ability of insulin to shuttle glucose into cells can be reduced. And as we get older, it's definitely becomes impaired. And what happens with ketogenic diet, you have usually higher fat, and glucose level, because of that, starts lowering and falling down. Lipase releases stored triglycerides. Technically, you start burning your fats. And when you burn fats, you release fatty acids that travel to liver, and liver produces ketone bodies, and ketone bodies are wonderful energy sources. And with age, we do not change production of energy from ketones. And because of that, ketogenic diet is frequently a very good diet for elder brains. And here's some studies showing that in type 2 diabetes, after 52 weeks, which is 1 year, low carbohydrate group showed decrease in glycemic variability, much better than low fat diet group. And even though A1C was similar in both diets, A1C average 3-month blood sugar average went down very similarly. The low carbohydrate diet led to greater reduction in anti-diabetic medications. So when you are on a low carbohydrate diet, which technically is ketogenic diet, people require much less medications to keep the sugars even. And that definitely makes sense, because with high carbs diet, you still have to overcome that hyperglycemia after each meal, and you would have to utilize medications to keep that going. In the past, ketogenic diet was used to treat seizure disorders, and then the medications for seizure disorders became available, and people stopped using ketogenic diet for that. Then you can see here this article published in 2019. It showed that in Alzheimer's disease, in mild Alzheimer's disease, ketogenic diet improved cognition in patients with those ApoE positive genes, ApoE4 positive genes subjects. So this could be a wonderful way to rescue the cognition, rescue the patients. So while on ketogenic diet, I don't know if any of you tried, many people start feeling much more mentally focused, and this switch can encourage more nerve growth factors and synaptic connections between brain cells, and the result is it results in increased mental alertness, sharper focus, and improved cognitive capabilities. So and of course, you do want to do ketogenic diet in the right way, because if you just go and eat meat and eggs and all kind of processed food, processed meats, it's not as beneficial as if you were to have more polyunsaturated fats from different liquid oils with some utilization of eggs and meats. And if you use eggs and meats from animals that are pasteurized and not pasteurized, pasture raised and free range, those will be much better quality of nutritionally compared to traditionally raised animals. So emerging science suggests that optimizing cerebral energy metabolism with ketone diets ketone body may benefit a wide array of neurological conditions. So it's not only Alzheimer and seizures, but appears to be it's effective on anxiety, depression, reaction time, motivation, and impulsivity, which is mood disorders can have problems with that. So learning ability starts getting better as well. More information about ketosis and Alzheimer's disease. One theory is that ketones protect brain cells by reducing reactive oxygen species, which are byproducts of metabolism that can cause inflammation. So when you eat sugar, it's more likely to produce those reactive oxygen species and cause that inflammation compared to when you are on ketogenic diet. Another theory is that diet high in fat, including saturated fat, can reduce amyloid proteins that accumulate in the brain in patients with Alzheimer's disease. So impaired brain glucose utilization, as I mentioned before, that over time our brain utilizes glucose less compared to younger brain, and that's why having ketones as a source, it could be a good thing. During aging, you can see glucose uptake is 10 to 15% lower and can be up to 35% lower in certain brain areas in neurological disorders such as Alzheimer's disease. So change your fuel, change the function. Diseases with decreased glucose uptake into brain cells, Alzheimer, Parkinson, multiple sclerosis, Huntington, chorea, LS, Lou Gehrig's, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, some form of autism, Down syndrome, develops Alzheimer very early, by age 30 and 40. Acute brain injury accompanied by lack of oxygen, and type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So when you do any version of ketogenic diet or maybe just paleo diet, it appears to be beneficial to use MCT oil. And MCT oil is a part of coconut oil, but it's a certain portion that when you absorb it, it does not actually require the bile for absorption, unlike every other fat in the body. And therefore, it's easy to digest than other versions of fats. It increases ketone body productions, and because of that, it supports cognitive health. MCT sends directly to liver, and it has thermogenic effects, meaning it will speed up your metabolism. Plus, it potentially has mitochondrial function improvement, which is very good because that way you can create more energy, and that's what many people have complaints of low energy. So yes, having MCT oil is important, and ketone-derived MCT improved cognition in diabetics and Alzheimer's disease patients, and attenuated the neurodegeneration in mouse models of ALS, MS, and Alzheimer's disease. Majority of studies performed with mixture of certain length of medium chain triglycerides, consistent of 8 carbons and 10 carbons. And you can see here different research related articles. As well, MCT oil supportive of gut environment by combating harmful bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. You know probably that coconut has wonderful effects on being antibacterial and antiviral and antifungal. MCT contains antioxidant properties, which is why coconut oil has far-reaching inflammatory benefits. People do notice when they increase amount of MCT, usually it helps with weight. But again, if you do ketogenic diet, usually it leads to some weight loss. It does support satiety, so people feel fuller, sooner, and because of that, they reduce intake. I had some patients who would start ketogenic diet, and instead of losing weight, they will start gaining weight, and that's because their satiety mechanisms are broken, and they did not feel this satiety even with eating fats. So, and I'm not sure how accurately they followed all the instructions to get into ketosis. So MCT oil reduces stored body fat by raising metabolic function, balances hormonal levels, improved mood, fight bacterial infection, viruses, absorb fat-soluble nutrients from various food. However, you don't want to take too much MCT oil because you can get diarrhea. MCT oil, you want to start with small doses, like teaspoon. You can go up to two tablespoons. But again, if you have MCT oil and you notice diarrhea, then back off, try to use less. There are different powders with MCT oil, like here, Metagenics has powders that have additional some kind of taste enhancing properties. But technically, MCT oil is usually oil, and we used to have fairly frequently MCT oil in a coffee, and there is a very popular bulletproof coffee. I've learned about that quite a few years ago, and bulletproof coffee has MCT oil in it. Right now, it's version of it called brain octane, which implies that it's supposed to support your brain function. So I do believe MCT oil is in Pringles type of potato chips, I guess. And again, if you eat too many of them, you will get punished and you will get diarrhea. So watch out how much MCT you have, but in general, otherwise, it's quite good. So this particular product from Metagenics delivers 10 grams of this correct version of C8 and C10 fatty acids. Could be added to any meals, beverage, because this particular one is flavorless and odorless. And there are other ones here, and there are pluses and minuses. I am not necessarily promoting one versus the other. I'm just utilizing the slides from Metagenics. So you are welcome to research the pluses and minuses. I know we use in our house different version of MCT oil. It's actually from lard, L-A-I-R-D, and it is enhanced by mushrooms, different mushrooms, like medicinal mushrooms, lion mane and other ones. So you have not only you have MCT oil, but you have the mushrooms at the same time. It becomes good creamer for your coffee or tea or whatever. So other things that may support our brain is bacopa, and bacopa is just comes from one that it's kind of like an herb, and it's known to be mental revitalizer. And animal studies of effect of bacopa shown that herb has a facilitatory effect on acquisition, consolidation, and retention of newly acquired behaviors in response to both positive and negative reinforcement. So technically, it helps you to retain your information faster. It's Ayurvedic Ayurvedic herb back from India, and it's produces non-specific increased resistance, revitalizes nerves, brain cells, and the mind, strengthens adrenals, and purify blood, according to Ayurveda. And in humans, it improves anxiety and mental function, mental fatigue. Affects CNS may be mediated through stimulation of GABA and cholinergic systems. So that's one. Another one is holy basil. Holy basil has been used for centuries as a tea. I actually grew holy basil and it grows in Ohio, and it has very nice smell, but it's a little bit too more licorice-like to me, so I didn't like it as a tea. But when you take it in a capsule, you wouldn't even know. So it has actual effects on lipoxygenases and cyclooxygenase prostaglandin pathways, which makes it anti-inflammatory. It's antihistamine. It decreases acid and pepsin output, enhances gastric mucosal strength, helps normalize the stress responses. It indicates hypoglycemic effect, so you have to be potentially careful with blood sugars, and has ability to reduce cholesterol and other blood lipids. Ashwagandha is one of my favorite herbs. It's great adaptogens and has been used in Ayurveda for centuries as well. It's part of rejuvenative tonic, used for stress, tolerance, vigor, stamina. It's actually does regulate cortisol, and as you remember at the beginning, we talked that cortisol affects our brain. If we have too much cortisol, it affects our brain. So ashwagandha has nice effect. When you need to enhance your cortisol, it will enhance it. When you need to push it down, it will push it down. So technically, there are not too many side effects. It says no side effects, but there are probably some people who will say that they will have some itching or scratching or whatever else related to taking ashwagandha, but technically it will be very close to placebo. So Metagenics has this type of support with holy basil, ashwagandha, bacopa, and amla fruit as your stress protection. Other companies have similar combinations, and you can play around, find whichever one you feel like you like better. But those will be the main stream for first stage of the stress when you have that slightly elevated cortisol or even relatively higher level of cortisol due to high stress. It will help people to deal with stress. That appears to be what this combination will do. The other chemical that's super important for brain is acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is part of memory pathway, and several medications are actually work through this pathway. It definitely, part of this acetylcholine called choline is derived from dietary sources and cell membranes. And that another part acetyl-CoA derives from mitochondrial Krebs cycle. So right now with Alzheimer's disease, we have inhibitors of this acetylcholinesterase in order to increase potentially level of this acetylcholine in synapses between nerve cells. And when you do that, that appears to support our brain. So there is apparently herb that can do that, and it can do, you can of course try actual medications like Namenda and such, but you can as well try Hyperazine. Again, I'm not claiming that any of the products here work or shown in double placebo control studies to reduce Alzheimer, but we can see how it works on different parts of the brain, and the studies are actually were done. So Hyperazine derives from Chinese club moss. It has longer half-life and slower rate of dissociation compared to any other commercially available acetylcholine enzyme inhibitor, and it is shown to be neuroprotective via non-competitive binding to a receptor called NMDA, and works mechanism of action similar to Namenda. Possibly it has superior efficacy. Again, I cannot claim unless I've seen the results. But it does appear to have anti-excitotoxic and anti-apoptotic effects, greater activity to this receptor, inhibits glutamate neurotoxicity, direct specific activity at NMDA receptor. It has antioxidant properties and protection against amyloid toxicity. Summary: who would benefit from this type of herb? Person who is usually over age 40 feels like their memory is maybe not as sharp as used to be. Person who forgets names of people, may have family history of dementia, has a personal history of head trauma, because head trauma, as you remember, is another risk for dementia, and can't learn new things as fast as they used to. Very interesting proline-rich polypeptide. That is another thing that apparently effective in destruction of amyloid plaques. New science identifies CNS protection, antioxidant properties in colostrum-derived PRP, proline-rich polypeptides, and new patented technology extracts and preserves the bioavailability and bioactivity of this peptide. The peptide could be new advances in addressing this amyloid plaque. In cell, animal, and human research demonstrates that colostrum-derived PRP complex, it's a potent immunomodulator, inhibitor of oxidative stress, reduces intracellular oxygen species, increases intracellular glutathione. And glutathione, you've heard me talking multiple times. It's our master antioxidant. You would think of that as a super strong, I would say like a broom on steroids, or vacuum that cleans up your body from toxic elements. So yeah, the vacuum will be more like it. It reduces as well, PRP reduces lipid peroxidation, which is signs of oxidative stress, reduces, dissolves beta amyloid in vitro, which means in Petri dish. Of course, it would be nice to see studies in humans, or at least in some other animals, to make sure that it truly helps with cognitive function. And here it was study in 105 patients with Alzheimer's disease that it exhibited stabilizing effect on cognitive function, which is not very easy. Unfortunately, patients who already have the Alzheimer, it's hard to stabilize them. So having this 105 patients study, it's actually quite good study. PRP may improve cellular gene expression by protecting DNA, and hypothesis it improves that by reducing the aggregation of misfolded beta amyloid proteins in brain, and that ultimately results in a reduction of oxidative stress, reduction in apoptosis, and increase in cell lifespan. And another study from 2005 study suggests that neuroprotective effects exerted by PRP are related to the reduction of beta amyloid fibrils, which is what we want to prevent progression of Alzheimer. And this is actually a picture, negative stain electronic microscopy on the left without it, and in 20 days how it was improved. Again, this is in vitro, because I don't think they would take brain biopsy. I don't think it would be kosher. And it improves outcomes associated with mild to moderate dementia. Oral administration of PRP improved the outcomes of Alzheimer's disease patients with mild to moderate dementia, as you can see. And even if you take it just 3 times a week, it still had very nice protection according to this study. Metagenics, of course, has a product for that. It's called Ceriva, which has huperzine and PCP or PCC, I guess, polypeptide complex with colostrum, 100 microgram. I think we will finish discussion for today, and we can maybe do the rest for the next time, because we are running out of time, and I want to actually talk to you after I stop recording.